Hey folks, this is Mr. MegaManFan. Like, share, comment, subscribe. You know all the things to do. Today I'm going to do something that I honestly never thought of doing before, which is a direct transfer of files that were made from the Analog Super NT into the SD card slot of a waiting computer. Now, previously, when I was dumping games from the Super NT, what I would do, and Tingo says hello, by the way. Yes, Tingo, we can all hear you. Previously, what I would do would be to dump the carts and then copy the files on the SD card to an SD card that I would use in the FX Pack Pro or the SD to SNES that I had previously. I don't know why it didn't occur to me to just put the SD card from the Analog Super NT directly into a PC and fire up RetroArch or OpenEMU. I mean, yeah, I still want to physically play the games on a Super Nintendo or an Analog Super NT through either the EverDrive or the SD card slot, so that's not even the issue. Well, the issue is, of course, if you want to play games that have Super FX chips, you need to use an FX Pack Pro or SD to SNES. So you can't just rely on the SD card slot in an Analog Super NT. If you're playing it on original hardware, you need an EverDrive. If you're playing it on the Super NT and it has an enhancement chip, you still need an EverDrive of some kind. Long way around to saying that I was doing what seemed obvious to me at the time, when, if I was thinking about it, I could have just been playing the games right away on a Mac or a PC without having to copy them over to the SD card of an FX Pack Pro or SD to SNES first. I could have saved myself a step instead of having to prepare everything. I could have just been playing them right away. I think it's the fact that I got a Mac from my neighbor that has an SD card slot on the side of the monitor is what gave me the idea. Tingo must not be a fan of that Mac because he's sure making a lot of fuss right now, but when I saw the SD card slot on the side and looked at the SD card slot on the side of the Super NT, I don't know, a light bulb just went off in my head like, oh my god, why was I not doing this the whole time? So today I'm dumping a set of 11 Super Famicom games. You may remember that I did a pickups video, where I got a bunch of Bomberman games and a few other random things were mixed into the lot along with them, like SimCity 2000 and Kaiju Monogatari and Super Nazo Puyo, which turned out to be one of the weirdest games of the bunch, I might add. I thought it was going to be a Super Puyo Puyo game, and instead I was controlling a character that was wandering around a castle and interacting with people, and when they would hit the right dialogue option, it would pop up a Super Puyo Puyo puzzle. But the object was not what I thought. Instead of clearing the entire level of Puyo Puyo with chains, you didn't want to clear the level. There was some kind of weight limit at the bottom of the playfield, and if you set off too many chains and left too many blocks at the bottom, the whole thing would collapse. So it was actually some sort of hybrid between an RPG and a strategy puzzle game, where you have to solve the puzzle by putting the Puyo Puyo piece that drops into one and only one spot so that the blocks don't all disappear. It completely screws with your head from the way that you think of playing Puyo Puyo games. You're going to see a little demonstration of what I'm talking about right here. This is the puzzle you are not supposed to beat. I was trying to find the perfect place to put this, and no matter where I put it, it seemed to set off too many chains and collapse the floor. So eventually, I just gave up and dumped the game. But I think out of all the games that I dumped today, my favorites were Super Bomberman 5, Super Nazo Puyo once I get a little better at figuring it out, and SimCity 2000 once I go from this version that's in Japanese to an English language version, then I'll be fine. But some of these others, I definitely need to patch. Like this RPG, I'm absolutely not going to get anywhere with the dialogue tree until I'm able to translate it. So I just went ahead and dumped it right away. The whole point of this experiment was not to play each game for a long period of time, but to make sure I could successfully dump all of them and then play them immediately on a PC. And there was no guarantee that this was going to work because the Mac that I'm doing this on is 12 years old. It's now considered obsolete by Apple, which means that I was able to get the operating system all the way up to Sierra, and then I hit a brick wall where it said, your machine is obsolete. It's not going to be allowed to access the Apple Store or the Mac App Store or any kind of store whatsoever. You must stop upgrading here. And there were workarounds that you could patch the firmware and do High Sierra and this and that and the third. And to me, it was like, no, that's not worth it for a 12-year-old computer. I've already upgraded this thing several times over several hours. I think I pushed it as far as I can or am willing to. So instead of getting the latest version of OpenEMU, I went to the GitHub repository and scrolled back to one that would work with Sierra, and I settled on 2.09.1, I believe is the version I used of OpenEMU. And I did a little test with it. I played some Junior Pac-Man on Atari 2600. I played some Sonic 3 on Sega Genesis. And it seemed to be working just as well as the OpenEMU current version that I use on my MacBook. So it seemed like this experiment would be a successful one. But you just never know if one of these games that I dumped would turn out to be an edge case where newer versions of OpenEMU support whatever mappers or coprocessors are in it, and older versions of OpenEMU were not designed with that in mind. So there was always the chance that this experiment could fail spectacularly. But like Adam Savage used to say on Mythbusters, failure is always an option. Sometimes you don't learn anything from succeeding at everything. You have to fail once in a while to learn what doesn't work so that you can change your approach to something that does work. And if it turned out that this version of OpenEMU was not supporting the games that I dumped, then I would know that I would need to try some sort of firmware patch to bring this Mac up to spec. I think this soccer game might be pretty good too, this Gundam Battle soccer game, but I didn't want to get into it too long or too far when I was trying to just dump all these carts. So even the games that were of interest to me, like Bomberman, I was like, no, I just want to make sure they work. And they all worked on the first try. I didn't have to clean anything twice, which, when you're importing games, is always nice. If everything works on the first try, that is so much the better, other than having to endlessly scrub away at the contacts with a magic erase one-up card or a Q-tip and some rubbing alcohol or whatever your preferred method is. But please don't blow into cartridges. That just introduces spit and saliva and things that will corrode the contacts over time. You don't want to do that. The easiest way I can explain it for people who believe in this is, would you spit into your television if your TV wasn't working? No. Why would you spit into a cartridge? It's the same thing. Use some common sense, but people just have these ingrained childhood memories of blowing into their cartridges to make them work, and they still do it today. It just became the urban myth that you had to blow on them to make them work. And because you are temporarily making some connectivity with a dirty cartridge by introducing your own bodily fluids, yeah, it might work for that limited amount of time that you put everything in there, but you're only going to degrade the cartridge over time, more so than the normal insertion and removal of a cartridge, which is a reason people want to back it up, because there is always that chance that eventually the contacts could wear away just from normal use, much slower than they would if you corrode them on purpose, but it could happen. And if you have a game that's valuable enough to you that you're worried about that, maybe you don't want to put it in the console every single time. So playing a backup off an EverDrive or playing your backup on an emulator that you approve of, either way, I can understand you might want that workaround as opposed to having to use your physical cartridge every single time. And it looks to me like this experiment is proving to be a success. I copied all of the files from the SD card that was in the Analog Super NT directly onto the desktop of my Mac. Now, could I have run them straight off the SD card itself? Sure. But does it make more sense to copy the folder and then put the SD card back into the Super Nintendo so I can dump some more games? Also, yes. Well, I say Super Nintendo, I mean the Super NT. You know what I'm saying. I don't think anybody's ever actually modded a Super Nintendo to have an SD card slot built in, but if somebody has, it's probably wired up to an EverDrive that's just tucked away inside the shell and you can't see it. Well, just to get the full screen experience here on the Mac, I put Kirby Bowl on the emulator and played that, and yeah, it looks beautiful full screen. And if you notice, the sound is coming from behind me instead of in front of me now. That's the location of the Bluetooth speaker that I synced with this Mac. I'm using Bluetooth for the sound and for the controller. They're both running simultaneously with no issues, not having any lag in the sound or the inputs. And I'm using a Retrobit Sega Genesis controller that has enough buttons for either Genesis or Super Nintendo. Yes, it does have the shoulder buttons at the top, L and R, so I can use it for either one. I can map everything for either console to all of the buttons on the controller. It is incredibly handy that way. So I think I'm ready to declare this experiment an unqualified success. SD card slot from the Super NT to SD card slot on the iMac. Nothing I've tried doesn't work. So from now on, when I want a quick fix of these games, I don't have to wait to load everything onto the EverDrive.